So whenever people think of Clark Kent Superman showing up in the Marvel Universe, they think of like crossovers, Marvel vs. DC or JLA Avengers, or even the Amalgam Universe when Marvel and DC were merged into a singular continuity. But Clark Kent has shown up in Marvel Comics a lot more often than you think. Sometimes these appearances are ridiculously obvious, like Excalibur Volume 1, issue number 8, when Clark Kent and Lois refer to each other by their actual names. Other times, it's a Where's Waldo type thing, right? That you won't really notice he's there unless you're actively looking for it. And so for some of the more cameo type appearances, although they do have a little more meat and potatoes to them, these are things like Captain America Volume 1, issue number 260, when Clark Kent shows up at a press conference at Rikers Island, or in Secret Wars 2, when he actually appears as a reporter talking about the Beyonders Island. In Avengers 228, he comments on the trial of Hank Pym, that Hank Pym had been put on trial after basically being forced to steal adamantium from the government. It was all a frame job by a villain named Egghead, but still, Clark Kent makes this comment that it's like the trial of the century. And Avengers 296, this one is not as absolute as the other ones are. It looks like Clark Kent as a handful of reporters that are basically knocked away by Thor and Black Knight, but it's not a perfect one-to-one, right? This one is a little more up to interpretation. But in Avengers 325, he dances with She-Hulk, which is kind of cool. In Avengers 327, he makes a remark about a character named Rage, who's basically traveling faster than a speeding bullet, as he phrases it. And in Ghost Rider Volume 3, issue number 66, he actually is in the process of protecting Lois from a character named Blackout when he says, this is a job for Superman, or almost says it, and actually gets cut off before he can. And in fact, as recently as Fantastic Four, issue number 538, which was part of Civil War, Clark is actually one of a handful of people who were in line to try to lift Thor's hammer after it falls to New Mexico. And so the question here is like, when did all of this start? Right? Was it really just kind of an instance where he popped up in a cameo and it's just kind of been a thing for decades? The answer is yes. And in fact, it actually started in Uncanny X-Men issue number 98. Now, this was a Where's Waldo type thing. And honestly, it's only because of the other appearances of Clark Kent in Marvel that you can even say this is Clark and Lois in the first place. Because again, a Where's Waldo type thing, if you weren't looking for them, you would never find them. They actually appear here, right, in this just little comic book panel down in the bottom corner. Now, of course, this is the comic book that would go on to segue into the Phoenix Saga. So basically it unfolds with like the rest of the X-Men being attacked and then ultimately kidnapped by Stephen Lang. No relation to Scott Lang, Ant-Man. Taken to a satellite, Jean Grey and company, they follow suit, and then they're rescued after a great big huge fight. Jean Grey comes back to Earth, and the Phoenix Force bonds with her when they hit some cosmic rays. And so again, it's one of these really, really important comics, but it is cool to see that Lois and Clark appear in this. Now, this is when Marvel started to kind of amp up his appearances and give him a little more meat and potatoes and show that he is actually part of the Marvel Universe. This came with Marvel Team Up Volume 1, issue number 79, because Clark is invited to the Christmas party at the Daily Bugle and has a conversation with Robbie Robertson. Now, he does talk about how he works for another newspaper industry that's out there, but there's a big difference between having him cameo in Uncanny X-Men 98 and having him interact with other characters who were here. It's one of the cool things that goes on. Another instance of him interacting with other characters in Marvel came with Thor Volume 1, issue number 341. Now, this one does require a little bit of context, so bear with me here for a second, but this story basically opened up with Thor arriving at Avengers Mansion and looking to set up shop on Earth with a new alter ego because the Donald Blake persona simply didn't exist anymore. And so while some stuff transpires and he's whisked off to Battleworld and yada, 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 he eventually shows back up on Earth. And when he does, he heads to S.H.I.E.L.D. in order to ask Nick Fury for help in building a new identity. So then you cut to Thor, who's just like wearing these rock jeans, right? He's got a ponytail, some Clark Kent style glasses, and starts operating under the name Sigurd Jarlsson. Now, the cool thing about this, and when Clark Kent comes into play, is Clark Kent bumps into him. This is one of those cameos that I think a lot of people are familiar with if they're familiar with Clark Kent showing up in Marvel. Now, the funny thing about this is that he actually recognizes Thor for who he is, but he ultimately gets up and shrugs it off. This, of course, is an Easter egg reference to the idea that like Clark Kent is a secret identity of Superman, so he knows how to keep somebody else's secret identity quiet. It was a cool little, Easter egg within an Easter egg. Now, another instance here is in Uncanny X-Men Annual number 10, which if you look it up, it's actually X-Men Annual number 10 if you choose to read it. But this is an instance where it is still more of a cameo than anything else, but this actually coincides with a fight between the X-Men and the New Mutants. The reason being because there's a point in the story, at least in the beginning anyway, where the X-Men are basically goofing off in the Danger Room. They're playing this kind of chaotic game of tag with Magneto, for lack of a better word, if we want to be a little nonchalant about it. But then Mojo hijacks the feed for ratings, and then he crashes the party by sending in Longshot. A lot of you guys are probably familiar with him from X-Men the Animated Series. Now, of course, Longshot is ultimately taken in by the X-Men, and then the X-Men act like nothing happens. But then over time, they start to de-age, and then they're ultimately brainwashed by Mojo, and a fight breaks out between the X-Men and the New Mutants inside of a theater, literally on this grand stage. Clark Kent is there watching the whole thing unfold. So again, another small little appearance for him. Now, another small little cameo here is in Amazing Spider-Man Annual number 23, when he watches She-Hulk storm out of Jameson's office, because Jameson just wrote this really offensive editorial that pissed Jennifer Walters off. Not the biggest thing in the world, but still a small little cameo here. Something that is a little more nuanced and a little more in-depth comes in Web of Spider-Man number 75, when there is a great big huge snowstorm that breaks out in the city of New York. Now, it ends up turning out that the whole thing is due to a group called the Avant-Garde, which is a trio of mystical artists, essentially, right? Boar has mutant powers, basically creates storms, Spark throws lightning, and then their leader, the Painter, literally alters reality with magical brushes. But in this whole great big huge storm, when it initially breaks out, the new Warriors show up in order to help people and get them out of harm's way. Clark Kent is rescued by Namorita. Now, the funny thing about this is he makes this offhanded remark about how he's there on his honeymoon. So again, having been married to Lois Lane. Now, I'm not 100% sure if there are any other appearances of Clark within Marvel Comics. Admittedly, Marvel's published tens and tens, if not hundreds of thousands of comics, so I don't know if I could find them all. But these are the ones that I was able to find. So not the lengthiest video there ever was that, we ever made, but still, right, if there are other appearances that I've missed, let me know down in the comment section, right? I think it'd be kind of cool if I missed enough in order to make a whole nother video. Although maybe that's bad, because maybe it seems like I don't know what I'm talking about. Anyway, let me know what you guys think down in the comments section. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.